Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle here, and welcome to another episode, another chat with a very successful state rank achiever from last year's HSC. I'm here with Phoebe. Phoebe, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course, no, I'm very good, thank you. I really appreciate you making the time to come on here. Obviously, you did really well last year, so congratulations. An ATAR of 99.25. You got a top 10 state rank in society and culture, so I'm keen to talk to you about that because we haven't had many people on for that particular subject. But you also were an all-rounder, you did well in everything else. You've been involved in public speaking, you're doing law at Sydney Uni. You have a podcast, which is cool, and that's very fitting for the occasion. So yeah, really excited to have a chat. But I thought maybe a good starting point. We were just talking before we started here, and you said that you are finding there to be quite a lot of differences between high school and university. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that so far, given that you're now a few months in.
Yeah, of course. I think probably what I would say the biggest difference is the kind of transition from, I suppose, like being hassled by teachers or having like that kind of support network in high school where you're really close with everyone and you know everyone in your classes and you're very close to all the people around you, to kind of having to transition into, I suppose, self-directed learning. You definitely, like anyone who's gone to university, I suppose, will notice that tutors and lecturers are not chasing you up for work. They don't really mind if you do the readings or not. It is entirely self-driven at university. So I think that's been really enjoyable for me because I was very self-driven in my HSC. I didn't really have many people chasing me up for anything. But I think the biggest transition is that you set your own day, you set your own hours. Everything that you put into university is what you're going to get out of it. And it's fully self-directed. So I think that was the biggest, I suppose, not shock, but I suppose change from high school to university for sure, is just how self-directed every single aspect of your life is now that you undertake tertiary education.
What about the social element? Are you finding that to be quite different? And is that tough at the start, trying to meet new people? Take me through that kind of journey.
Yeah, it definitely was tough at the start. I do attend a residential college, so I kind of already had quite a few friends who were doing the same degree as me that I met the week before I started university. So that made the transition a lot easier going in, knowing that I had a group of people who I could lean on. But I think absolutely, yeah, you're right. The social jump is also quite different as well. It's harder to meet people in an organic way. You often have to go to extra events, really put yourself out there in terms of your socializing, get people's social media details and follow up on those friendships is a really big thing as well. You have to kind of ask people to go out for coffee or out for lunch if you really want to really like solidify those friendships. But yeah, it's not the same in high school where you're kind of just seeing people every day and you just naturally form friendships. It's a little bit more, again, self-directed in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort. I think people underestimate that. Even when I did exchange, I went over to California and I found, I was 22 and I was a few years into uni, and then I went over and it was kind of thrilling and exciting, but I had to start from scratch. But I think I did underestimate the energy it would take to actually, build a base and find, that core group of friends that you're going to have for that semester or year or, even beyond that.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it is something to be wary of. I think when I was there, it was, as you say, you are getting a lot of details. It's kind of funny. You feel like you're, I don't know, like speed dating or something. It's something like that. And you're just getting details all the time, and it's absolutely draining. And I imagine, if you're someone who's more introverted, it's going to be even harder for you. And I'm quite extroverted in that respect, and I still found it exhausting. So it's something to be aware of, but it is definitely worth the effort. So to
Yeah.
build that base, to make sure you do try, because if you just kind of live the hermetic lifestyle and you stay in your cave because you're more comfortable like that,
Yeah.
that's going to be really detrimental, I think, to the long-term experience at university and in general wherever you are. I mean, it's really important in those first few weeks of uni. And even if it's just, if you didn't get it right the first time and you think, oh, I didn't really meet anyone the first semester, when the next semester starts, at the start, really make an effort there where you've got new classes and so forth. I think you get a huge payoff.
It's all about putting yourself out there. You just have to go up to people and talk to them and just try and socialize as best you can. You'd be surprised that you'd meet a lot of people, and everyone's really nice as well because everyone wants to make friends. So it's relatively easy, but it can be challenging definitely if you're a bit more introverted like me. Yeah.
So would you say you're more on the introverted side of the scale?
Definitely. Yeah, I'm slightly more introverted. I'm not a super extroverted person.
But nonetheless, you seem to have quite a strong demeanor and you seem confident. And I suppose that's not mutually exclusive with extroversion or introversion. But yeah, it is interesting to know that, even someone who is confident and out there and because you're involved in a lot of activities and societies I saw. So that shows that you are putting in the effort there, which is awesome.
Yeah. I think it's important to put in effort at university, especially because the social side is so huge. I think, especially leaving high school as well, I've noticed that there is more to life than academic achievement. The social aspect of university is actually what makes it so enriching and enjoyable. The things that I look back on now are already like, I've had good academic results. It's been fun in that respect, but the people I've met have absolutely made it for me these first few weeks. It's been really good. Yeah.
So let's say you were to go back in time 18 months and you're talking to your former self, Phoebe, as she's about to go into year 12. What would you say to her? What would you say in regards to the expectations she should have and things to be wary of in terms of make sure you do this, make sure you try and avoid this? What kind of advice would you give to that former version of yourself?
I would probably say to myself, try your best not to compare your journey to other people's journey. That was something that was so important that I learned throughout my HSC, was about, focusing on yourself and staying in your own lane and trying not to look at other people and think that you should be doing more or that they're doing more than you, and taking that on as a kind of stressor in your life. I think probably what I would say to myself is just, keep focusing on doing your own thing. You have your own goal. You know what you need to do. It's just about putting your head down and actually focusing on the work. Because I think a lot of what makes the HSC so overwhelming sometimes is the fact that it's not just the academic side of it, the difficulty of the content you're learning, I suppose. It's also the social aspect of it. It's people are always, talking about how much they're studying. People have different study routines, different study hours. It can be really overwhelming, I think, to look around at that and think, oh, I need to be doing 12 hours of study a day if I want to get X mark and get into X course. But probably what I would say to myself is just keep doing what you're doing and just do your own thing. Everyone does the HSC and does life differently, and you just have to figure out what works for you and try not to internalize the the expectations of other people, and just focus on yourself and really just focus on your own goal.
Yeah, and of course that is advice for all students going into year 12 or any year really. It's great advice generally for approaching a new year of study or anything that has a kind of weight to it with respect to accomplishment and success. And, there is a great saying that came to mind, that comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that if you do start comparing yourself to others, you often just feel dissatisfied. There's always someone doing more. There's always someone doing something different. And that will constantly make you question your own choices and question your worth and, how much have you done to accomplish your goals, etc. So I think, as you say, it is important to kind of stay in your lane, focus on what works for you. But at the same time, I think there is an element of keeping up with what other people are doing and drawing upon their strategies at times that are effective. So I was going to ask, where did you draw the line then? Because it's one thing to kind of not compare yourself to others. And I really like that from the perspective of, results and from the process as well to an extent. But I do think I learned a lot from other students when I was looking at, what are they doing? Oh, that's a more efficient way of doing it. I'm actually going to try that. So where did you draw the line there in terms of being inspired from others and doing your own thing?
That's a good point. I definitely did take inspiration from the people around me, and particularly I did a lot of research on effective study techniques, particularly around things like active recall when I was trying to really optimize my study schedule in the lead up to trials and HSC. I definitely would just do my own personal research if I was curious as to how other people were approaching HSC studies. I tried to I looked at the people around me and I obviously tried to emulate some of the things that they did if I thought it was effective. But at the same time, I would just always take that with a grain of salt, because I just kind of learned over time that I had kind of a different way of doing things and a different way of just kind of studying and just, managing my own schedule. And that's not going to, those management systems are not going to look the same for everyone else. So if I was, I suppose, comparing myself to other people or taking inspiration from other people, it would often just be my own personal research, just going externally to kind of find new study strategies, listen to the advice of other people who had also state ranked and gotten above 99, but not taking that on so deeply, kind of just taking it on with a grain of salt to just inspire me, not necessarily kind of use that as a reflection on how I'm not doing enough or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to draw upon that, but then obviously to reconcile that with your own preferences and then just be happy doing that. But I think an important caveat though to all of this is, and people are probably thinking this as you say it, is that this assumes that you already have some kind of system that you actually are motivated to do something, there is a huge cohort of students who are probably like, oh, okay, so I just don't compare myself to others, so I'll just keep doing nothing. And it's like, well, in that case, you actually should really draw upon others, and then to apply your advice here is to see what kind of resonates with you, and you're like, oh, I like this study technique, I like this strategy, I like doing this amount of hours. But you also don't want to kid yourself and think, oh, well, it's, don't compare, and it's just my style is to do nothing. There's also that extreme side. So I think it's
all about finding your own balance. Yeah. If you're a naturally disciplined person and you have your method of approaching HSC studies and that works for you, then you can stick to it. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Like if you have trouble motivating yourself or having that system in place, then taking inspiration and comparing yourself to other people is definitely the best way to go about it.
So take us through your routine, so to speak, in terms of that approach to study. Obviously, it might be different for different subjects, but you've already mentioned things like active recall. Do you want to define what that is? And do you want to talk about other methods that were pretty consistent across subjects? And then maybe tell us what were the key distinctions between some of the main subjects that you did?
Yeah, for sure. So my kind of study method or my study routine, I'd usually come home from school. I'd probably do about anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5 hours of study per day. And I would limit myself there and prioritize sleep quite a bit because I do think that is really important. But usually what I would do in that block of study is I would do the Pomodoro method. So I would do about 30 minutes of, deep, intense, focused work on whatever subject I was doing, and then taking a 5-minute break, getting up, going for a little walk around my house or something just to kind of distance myself from the study space. And I would use that technique to manage my time in that usual window after school. But then the techniques that I would often use across majority of my subjects, because I did all humanities, were, look, cover, write, check was a big one for me. Obviously looking at a question, kind of doing that whole memorization thing, giving myself questions, writing out everything I knew about a certain topic or a certain bullet point in the syllabus. And then going back, checking my notes, what did I miss, redoing it, and kind of just drilling myself to really understand all the content that I potentially wasn't getting, and really trying to make sure that I got across every single part of the syllabus, because something with the HSCs, you obviously have to be across everything if you want to do exceptionally well. And then I would use flashcards as well. I would use a software on my computer called Anki, and it is supposed to be slightly more, I suppose it's slightly better than Quizlet in terms of how it does active recall and spaced repetition for you. And I would just make flashcards for all of my subjects. So for economics, I would, memorize statistics via that. And I would, put definitions, and then I would test myself on them. And I would sit down and I would speak aloud to myself as I was doing the flashcards, going through the reasoning process, thinking out loud, doing those flashcards, and figuring out obviously the areas that I didn't know, and then going back and then refining those and making sure that I really understood them. So those were kind of my big study methods, was kind of look, cover, write, check, obviously Pomodoro method, because taking breaks is really important.
Tell us about the Pomodoro method there. Just define that for anyone who doesn't know it.
I'm not too much of an expert on it, but the Pomodoro method is kind of this idea that you do smaller study sessions and then have intermittent breaks over time, which means you can kind of sit down for longer periods of time and get more done. It's almost a way to make your studying more efficient, basically. You can sit down for 3 hours and do 3 hours of focus work, but it's likely that in that 3 hours, you're not entirely focused and really getting into the study and learning of the content. Whereas if you kind of break it up into smaller chunks with intermittent breaks, it often means that when you are studying, you're really, really focused and you're engaging in deep learning, which means you're more likely to understand the content better.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Yeah, definitely just about incremental study. And something I suggest for anyone doing the Pomodoro method is to basically make sure that with those 25 to 30 minute stints of study, that they are really focused. And that means, for me, putting the phone away from the desk, putting it outside of the room. I put an alarm on. I just put a 25-minute or 30-minute. Sometimes if I'm fresher, start of the day, I'll do 50 minutes and 10. So I actually do this method myself. 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off, or 25 on, 5 off, depending on how tired you are and where your willpower is. So as you get more fatigued, you can reduce the on times. But effectively, make sure that you get all distractions away, because the whole point is you want to make sure that it's 25 minutes of focused study, and then you can go and check your phone and do whatever you want in that other 5 minutes. That's the point. So it's not like you're doing this vague patch of 2 to 3 hours of study and you're kind of on your phone, you're kind of studying. The whole point is that it is focused when you're doing it. And if you think, oh, I just want to check my messages or I just want to break, it's only 25 minutes. It's only 30 minutes in your case. So it actually is very reassuring to know you've earned that break. So just an important kind of add on to that method. But I'm a huge fan of that. I think it definitely results in a lot more efficiency and a lot more effective study. So that's awesome.
I suppose another one would be Notion. I definitely can recommend that to any students listening. Is I kind of had my whole week planned out on a timetable, not necessarily into time blocks, but I basically would have this set up on my computer where I would have headings for all the different days. And then I would just have a separate to-do list for each day where I would take these big tasks and break them down across the week. So something I did in the lead up to my trials is, so for economics or modern history, for example, I would say to myself, sit down Sunday night and I'd be like, okay, by the end of the week, I want to have 80 pages of multiple choice economics questions done. So I would say, okay, I'm going to do this amount on this day, then I'm going to take a break, then put it on, Wednesday, might do these pages on this day. Then for a modern history essay, I might be like, okay, I want to do this. I want to write the essay plan on this day. Then I'll do the intro on this day. And I kind of would try and take these really big tasks, use Notion and my to-do lists to break them up. So by the end of the week, I would have multiple essays complete, many, many pages of practice papers done. And I would have all this stuff and I would be like, okay, I've done a lot this week. I feel productive. I feel like I've earned a break. I think breaking up those huge tasks or big goals you have into actionable small steps across the week using some kind of timetabling or planning software is something I would 100% recommend. It just made my life so much easier. Instead of doing paper to-do lists where everything gets lost, I would sit down every day and I would have a very clear outline of the stuff that I just wanted to get done. So by the end of the week, I would feel really accomplished and I would be feeling ahead because I had gotten a lot done.
Great. Yes, I could definitely speak to that as well. Scheduling, just knowing what you're doing at what time will change everything for you because it gives you that certainty. It removes that ambiguity. And in ambiguity, you will feel scattered and unsure. And just like with the Pomodoro method, you won't be as effective unless you actually have kind of predetermined what you're doing and for what length of time you're doing it. With respect to society and culture, that was the one you came 10th in the state in, so that's awesome. What were the keys there? Like if you were giving advice to someone and you had to reduce it to a few key things in terms of preparation at different times of the year, what were those things for that particular subject? And feel free to kind of break it up into the different exam components.
I think society and culture, it appears to be a relatively easy subject, but I think it can be quite complex because the ideas you're often asked to engage with can be quite high level and sociological and abstract. So my biggest tips for society and culture going across the entire year would be you need to have really, really strong notes. And I think the most important thing to have in these notes would be really explicit reference to different course concepts. So for any society and culture students, you'll have your syllabus outline and it will have huge chunks of kind of course concepts that you need to refer to. Society, culture, persons, time, institutional power and control, hierarchy. All these different course concepts will appear in the syllabus. And I think it's really important that in your notes, you have reference to these course concepts because ultimately that is what is going to get you marks. If markers read your work and they can see that you're making explicit reference to what the syllabus is asking you throughout the entirety of your response, I think it's going to hold you in a really good stead if you try and refer to those concepts. Another thing in those kind of having really good notes, subheading of that would be have heaps of examples. In society and culture, I would constantly be going above and beyond to try and research the most niche examples for all of my syllabus dot points, things that were not in the textbook, things that we didn't go over in class. I would read academic papers. I would bring in new course concepts and theories that I thought were interesting. So anything from the postmodern theory of cultural mystique or all these things that I know markers wouldn't have heard of. I tried to bring in all these new examples and new theories to make myself stand out. But also, this goes for any HSC subject as well. If you use examples, you look like you're substantiating what you're saying, and it bodes really well for your marks, I think. Particularly with society and culture, I think in order to get a band 6, it's more than just having that thesis and having that idea. It's generally about, having the idea, but whether or not you can back it up with something that's tangible or you can explain it with an example. So I would definitely say you need strong notes with lots of examples and reference to course content. But then I also would say practice is so important for society and culture all throughout the year as well. This goes for the multiple choice questions to the short answers to the essay questions that you get in the 2-hour exam. I think I would constantly be doing practice papers all throughout the year. I would sometimes just sit down of an afternoon, I would get a past HSC question and I would give myself 10 minutes and I'd be like, okay, write an essay plan, get out an introduction, break down the question. So I'd like highlight certain parts of it and think, okay, what could I say to hit this point here? And I would come up with a scaffold. And I would usually just repeatedly do that throughout the year. So I was constantly familiarizing myself with the kinds of questions that you can get. Because for society and culture, the questions are often quite heavy. They're complex things. They seem really simple, but they can get quite abstract. And you want to make sure that you have a really strong and precise answer, because that is what is going to get you marks. So I would also recommend practice questions are so key. Even if it's not a full practice essay, the act of just sitting down and looking at questions, breaking them down, and then planning for them, I would say is really, really helpful. So those would be my top tips for society and culture for sure.
That's awesome. And with the practice questions, can you give us some indication of how many you were doing and when you started doing them before, say, the HSC?
Yeah. So I think I started doing them probably end of term 2, if I remember correctly. And I would probably be doing maybe 4 practice questions a week, probably. I can't remember how many, like, I think probably towards trials and HSC, I was doing full timed essays because I obviously wanted to kind of, simulate exam conditions to make sure I could get everything out, that I wanted to say in that time. But I was probably doing about 3 to 4 practice questions or practice plans a week just for a question. And then I'd usually towards trials and HSC, I'd start taking these to my teachers. And I'd be like, hey, could you please have a look at this and tell me what you think? Is this right? Am I on the right track? I would get some feedback, do it again, and then kind of bring it back and just keep kind of really making sure I was getting to the crux of the question. But yeah, I think doing practice questions just consistently all throughout the year is really key for society and culture.
Yeah, because I think a lot of students tend to leave practice questions a little bit late, whereas in your case, you're actually doing them early, getting feedback, making adjustments, actually kind of cross-checking that with your notes and making sure you've included all of the relevant examples and you've got the distinguishing parts as well. So I think that's really important. So students out there who are thinking, oh, I should do all my notes and then day or two before do practice questions, I think that's kind of going the wrong way, and you should be doing practice questions up front. Would you suggest even doing them before you're fully comfortable with all of your notes and the content?
I think so. I think exposure therapy is honestly the best way to go about any HSC subject, just seeing the questions and familiarizing yourself with the kinds of things that you can get. Because I did it so often and because I was so comfortable with the kinds of questions that were coming up, by the time I got to my exams, because I had been doing them throughout the entirety of the year, when I got the questions in my exam, I didn't really have to think for too long. I was like, oh, okay, I know exactly what I need to say here. It's like when you practice something enough and you expose yourself enough to the kinds of questions that you get, even if you don't have the most incredible notes in the world, you're getting yourself in that exam mindset and you're getting yourself to think like you would at a HSC and in a HSC exam, which is ultimately what you're going to have to do at the end. So I think it's really important. Yeah, irrespective of the the quality of your notes or where you're at, I think just exposing yourself to any practice questions for any subject can be really helpful.
And in terms of society and culture, I'm interested personally in it because you said that some of the concepts are actually quite abstract, quite high level. Is there anything that comes to mind as an example of that? I mean, you mentioned something before with the postmodern idea, but what do you think in terms of that course is the most challenging concept, and what's your current kind of take on that?
I think the most challenging kinds of concepts are the ones like institutional power and power and authority. They're both, the reason that I find them abstract and hard is because they can be quite vague. Like institutional power can be many different things. It can be power exercised by non-state actors or businesses or governments. It can be, it can be so many things. And power and authority also exists at multiple levels. That's what can get quite hard at society and cultures. You have the micro, the meso, and the macro, and all of these intersect and overlap. And it gets you thinking. That's why I think society and culture sometimes can be a challenging course, is because it requires you to be a very engaged person with what happens in the world around you. But yeah, I would say the most challenging or abstract course concepts would be things like institutional power and power and authority. But I think I probably made it more abstract for myself. I definitely made it harder than it needed to be. But I was just very interested in it. So I always tried to take it to that next level. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go and find this new theory and I'm going to use this in my exam. And I was a bit too into it. So that's probably why it was very abstract for me, I think.
No, yeah, look, that's great. I think the point you made about going that extra mile, differentiating your responses through examples that aren't just in the textbook is a really important one, especially for students who are trying to get those top marks. It's not so much essential to do that to get a band 6, I would say. But to get a high band 6 and to stand out, and especially to compete with the best in the state, of course it's going to come down to how much you are differentiating your response to others. And if to differentiate in a positive way, it requires additional research, requires, as you say, getting some of those more academic arguments and examples that aren't just the basic straightforward ones. So yeah, I think they're all really good points. But for anyone who's watching this, who's like, I just want to kind of get a band 5 or a band 6 if I can, I don't think that's the main thing to focus on. But the takeaway here is that, again, to your point earlier, Phoebe, it's about doing what works for you, and you were interested in it and you wanted to push it to that extra mile. So that was a really important ingredient. But I think everything else about the past papers, making solid notes, but also condensing the notes, I would add as well, like I always say, like, make cheat sheets based on your extended notes so that you've just got the fundamental trigger words that are going to help you remember all of the longer notes anyway. There's usually a couple of parts, there'll be a few things on a page of notes that will help trigger everything else in terms of your recollection. And there might be statistics or key terms or something like that. So I would really focus on those as well once you get those more extensive notes done. But doing past questions, doing application while you're in the process of making notes is super important, not leaving that to the very end. So yeah, I think we covered a lot of good ground there in terms of the approach. What subject did you find to be the trickiest to study for? And let's talk, aside from society and culture, if it was that.
I probably would say it would have to be English Advanced. English Advanced was very, very challenging for me. It was a bit of a journey for me. I had to work ridiculously hard to try and get really good at it, because I think there's such a jump between, year 10 and then you get to year 11 English Advanced, and then it just gets even harder in year 12. And I really had to sit down and really try and figure out, okay, what do I need to do in order to just get a band 6 and hope for the best? So I had to spend a lot of time, again, going that extra mile, doing research to try and make base essays, which I think is something that you've spoken extensively about on multiple of your platforms. But I had to write, those base essays, be really across all of my texts and the different, conceptual ideas and the different themes. But then also forcing myself to do the practice of looking at different questions, coming up with those thesis statements, and then just actually getting really good at making sure my essays were really exactly what the markers wanted. So English Advanced would be the hardest one to study for.
It's tricky, I think. No matter how confident you are with writing or with English, I think that subject is very demanding, and it just requires a lot of time and preparation, but also the strategy there. As you alluded to with our videos, we try and focus on that in terms of making sure you're focusing on the right things so that you're not overwhelmed by the amount of content, and just keep it focused on the exam structure and the format there, and what's kind of the minimum effective dose for each thing, and then focus on the skills of adapting to different questions, etc. Is there any other advice you would give to students who are preparing for or currently going through year 12?
I probably would say consistency is really important. I think that's something that I did a lot of in year 12. And I think it was probably something that I would attribute most of my, success to, was just the fact that I was very consistent with how often I was working. I was constantly just chipping away at all of my subjects. I think I am still a firm believer to this day that doing, weeks and weeks of small, consistent effort on all of your subjects all throughout the year, whether that is note making, doing practice questions, etc., is going to hold you in better stead than doing like 12 hours of study 3 days before the exam. Because I think you have to get really good at familiarizing yourself with the content, and then being able to really feel confident enough to answer those questions. So I think all throughout, what I think was just the biggest piece of advice I would give was just consistency. I think all throughout the year, I was constantly doing practice questions, bringing them to my teachers, getting feedback, doing more, getting more feedback, fixing things, redoing them, really trying to focus on doing my own learning. So even when we didn't have exams on, I'd still be doing practice questions. I'd still be studying, because I was so focused on trying to make sure that by the time I got to trials and HSC, I didn't have to stress, because I was like, I know what I need to do. I know kind of the things that I would have to fix up on. So I think consistency is really important. But then something else I would definitely recommend, and it worked quite well for me, was having a mistakes book. It sounds really cynical, but every time I would get a mark back or paper back, you get those huge chunks of feedback from your teachers, or even if I was just handing in practice papers or I got questions wrong, I would have this giant Google document on my laptop. And I would split it up, into my different subjects and write down the things that I got wrong and the things that I needed to go back and work on. So like for English, it was like, oh, make your thesis statement clearer. In my feedback, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to put that down there. So when I was doing new questions or getting prepared to kind of like do a practice paper, I would go back and look at my mistakes book and think, okay, these are the things that I need to fix. It's the best method for me, I think, because it ensures you never make the same mistake twice. And it helped me kind of conceptualize all the things that I just needed to work on, all my weak areas. So by the time that I got to trials, I had kind of worked on fixing a lot of the things that I used to do wrong at the start of the year. I kind of was able to really focus on developing all my study technique, and all my practice was going towards honing in on my weak areas. It sounds like a really depressing thing to have a giant document of all the things you've done wrong in your HSE, but it was really good to just look back and actually think, okay, this is what I need to fix in order to get good marks. And it makes it so easy because you can just see exactly what you need to do. Those would probably be my two biggest things: consistency and the mistakes book.
Look, I think the mistakes book's a great idea. I think some people do that in different forms. So another thing that came to mind, depends on the subject to some extent. But if you were doing a subject like PDHP or society and culture or economics, you would get the feedback, as you say, figure out all the different subtopics where you lost marks, and then you'd have a printout version of your syllabus or an online version and highlight in red. A lot of people do this, highlight in red those dot points, and then they're the things that you then just focus on until you have 100% kind of clarity on that particular area. So there are different ways of attacking it, but I think the mistakes book's a great idea. And I think, and you said that you actually did that via a Google Doc, which makes it pretty easy, right? Just paste it all in there. You can categorize it by subject, and then it allows you to consciously focus on your weak areas or weaker areas and make them your strengths, right? And as you say, then you won't make the same mistakes twice, which would be crazy. But a lot of students don't actually take the time to identify those and actually isolate them out and then focus disproportionately on those weaker areas. Because as I say, everyone likes to focus on the things they're good at, right? It's like comfort food. And you will happily go and study the thing that you know you can get 100% on. But the thing that seems to be a kind of escaping your understanding and it requires a lot more time and effort, that's the thing you're going to have the most resistance towards. So if you can go through a process that you're talking about, having the mistakes book or document, putting those things on there, it's going to encourage you to just kind of sit down with that and make those the first things you do rather than the last thing, which would be the temptation for most students.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about, like you said, working on the areas that you're weak in, because you can go into any exam and you can have you can feel really confident with a lot of the content, but ultimately where you're going to lose marks is on the things that you don't know. So it's about making sure that you go into every test just feeling like you just know as much as you possibly can. But yeah, it was really helpful for me because I feel like, particularly with English, I would always have things that I needed to work on. And every time before I would write a response, I'd sit down and look at the document. I'd be like, okay, so in this response, I really need to focus on my thesis. That's what I need to focus on. But yeah, it's definitely a very helpful technique for sure.
Yeah, and it plays into something else. I was speaking to a school recently about this. So maybe you're familiar with the term, but the kind of Pareto principle, it's also known as the 80-20 rule. And the idea is that if you were to look at your exam or look at a topic and look at the syllabus, if you can figure out what your weakest 20% is in terms of those topics, which would probably be the things going into your mistake book or mistake document, right? They're probably going to account for at least 80% of the lost marks in your exam, right? So if you can think about it like that, I think that's quite useful to kind of figure out what is your bottom 20%. And then, because if that's accounting for 80% of the lost marks, you should be spending 80% of your study time on those particular topics. Whereas often it's at least the opposite, if not more. People will go, I'm not even going to look at those areas because I'm uncomfortable with them. So the better students will definitely have a system like you've just described to do that, identify the weaker areas, and then spend a disproportionate amount of your study time on those areas.
It's the way to go about it. It can be hard sitting down and forcing yourself to actually do the hard task of relearning and getting things wrong, but ultimately it works in the long run.
One other thing I wanted to ask about was the public speaking. So seems like that's something you've been doing throughout school, and I can tell you're a good speaker, even just speaking with you now. Where did that come from? When did that start for you?
I suppose I wouldn't consider myself like an excellent public speaker. I am, yeah, because I'm slightly introverted. It's not something I'm huge on, but I do, if I'm interested in something, I will speak on it. It all started when I did mock trial in year 11. Because I wanted to pursue law. I was really interested in kind of trying to get a bit of practical experience in what it might be like to do in person, litigation, obviously with two sides. And I did enjoy that. Unfortunately, that was cancelled because of COVID-19. So I only did a few rounds, but I really enjoyed kind of getting into the debate and kind of working with a team of people and coming up with these arguments and getting to kind of, express these in kind of a mock courtroom setting. But then I also did Model United Nations for a little bit as well. And that was also really rewarding because I'm really interested in international relations and social justice. It was kind of exciting, again, to do the research, come up with my arguments, and then kind of share that, with a group of people in a kind of public forum. But yeah, I think in terms of the public speaking, it all really started kind of from like many people, I'm assuming, like a mock trial Model UN kind of experience in high school. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And before that, before year 11, there was nothing in particular?
I actually didn't do any public speaking before then. Yeah. No public speaking for me. I've never actually debated before. So
wow, that's impressive. But do you distinguish between like debating, public speaking in terms of preparation? Do you enjoy both of those things where public speaking is more, if we just say, okay, that's more like a prepared thing, and then debating is more like on the spot? Do you have a particular, preference?
I probably would say I do enjoy preparing some things before I begin to speak, just because I'm a firm believer that, if you're going to speak extensively about something, it's probably best that you know what you're talking about. But I think, yeah, I do like to prepare for public speaking. I on the spot things can be enjoyable too, but it's definitely not my strength. I do like to prepare before I speak, but honestly, it is contingent upon what it is. If it's on the spot debating about something I feel that I'm interested in, then I will happily do it. But I do definitely like to prepare quite a bit for the more public speaking side of it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. But I think the mood in the mock trials is all good. It was actually the same experience for me when you said that. I was doing a mood-in thing. They call it moot-in, as you've probably heard about at university. And we were about to start that session, and then COVID got in the way of that, so that was a shame. But that's something that I would encourage anyone to do. I actually left it a little bit late in the game when I was at uni, so I never actually got to fully do it. But I'd signed up because I was like, I don't want to go through this degree not having done mood-in at least once. And then I did it for a subject I really liked, which was constitutional law. And then it was like 3 days before we were going to do it or something. The COVID thing happened, and that was it. But I would encourage people to do that because it's good to get well versed and skilled at getting up there with content you are comfortable with, but then being able to adapt on the spot as well. So kind of the mood-in and the mock trials kind of has both elements of you know the content well, but you're going to be hit with sudden questions and you will have to improvise to some extent. But at least you have the base knowledge there. What about the podcast? So what's it called? The Modern Democracy?
Modern Democracy, yeah.
Okay, the Modern Democracy. So what's the podcast about?
So I started it when I was in year 11, very start of year 11. And my whole aim was to kind of inspire and educate and empower young Australians in Australian politics. Because I've always been a very political person. It's something I'm really interested in. For anyone who knows me in real life, I'm always talking about politics. And I looked around at my world, and I noticed that a lot of people from where I'm from in regional Australia don't really know that much about what happens up on the hill in Canberra. I think national political discourse is often quite disconnected from, youth, young people everywhere. And I had a few friends who were like, do we have a president of Australia? And I was like, we do not. So I tried to I still do make these podcast episodes where I kind of take these really complex national policy issues and synthesize them down into kind of bite-sized episodes where people can listen and feel like they can contribute to political debate. Because there is no worse feeling than like being in a discussion where you don't really know what's going on. And particularly because the policies that are debated on in all levels of government are things that impact people, from our age group. It's really important that young people know about what happens. So I kind of have this platform where I, take these really complex political issues and then I make them accessible to people. And I try and explain them in a way that is very simple and easy to understand, because sometimes these things can get a bit too complex and then people feel like they are not smart enough to engage in Australian politics. But yeah, that's basically the rationale behind it. Yeah.
No, that's very cool. I admire that. So I think that's a great thing you're doing. And the more that the kind of seemingly scattered and inaccessible political discourse can be broken down and simplified, the better, because then people can make more informed decisions, obviously. I was just thinking we had the state election recently, and I'm lining up and I'm thinking I haven't heard like any kind of simplified explanation of what each party represents and what they're doing. Like, maybe the debate's always happening, but often because there is so much argument, and I don't like the way that it is so adversarial, our system. Although obviously opposing views are good, but it's like never finding common agreement is not good, because there obviously is common agreement, but no one likes to concede on things. But in any case, I just found that I would be like, man, there must be a huge proportion of the population who would just vote in without any context, and that's probably going to swing the vote and decide it. So it's a really important area if you can actually make those ideas more accessible.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. That's my saying. It's just the feeling of, and it's been such a rewarding thing to do as well, because I've had so many people come up to me and say, I finally understand what's going on now. Like, I know who I'm going to vote for. And that makes me so happy, because I'm just like, it's so nice to see, get to watch people feel confident about what they know and feel like they can understand what happens around them. So yeah, I think you're so right. It's so, it's very high level, and it's hard to sometimes bring politics down to just what it is, a very, grassroots debate of ideas. And the more people understand that, the better.
So it's funny when you say, oh, people know who to vote for after listening to the podcast. So are you impartial on the podcast?
Yeah, I am impartial on the podcast. I mean, some episodes I do tend to give my opinion sometimes, because that's what a lot of people in my area do listen for sometimes, is my thoughts on things. But for a lot of it, I just try and take these complex ideas and make them as impartial as possible, and just show people the facts, different opinions on the facts, different ideas, and then leave them to make their own choice.
Well, make sure everyone you tune in to an episode if you want some help understanding the political environment. But Phoebe, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really nice conversation, and I think that's going to help a lot of students with their study and other things as well, political understanding.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. Is there anything else? I mean, we point them in that direction of the podcast if they want to check it out. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I think I'm all good. Yeah, I think it's been good. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. If you enjoyed this chat, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.